Sometimes a good story gets in the way of making a good point. False information is easier to run into than ever before, and what's worse is that sometimes a false narrative can get more traction than the truth simply because it makes for a better conversation piece. No, The Lion King didn't rip off Kimba the White Lion. The OVA that everybody points to prove this was made after The Lion King. That's the ripoff. But it's a better story to say that Disney stole their most famous movie from Japan, so just say that instead. Now, of course, lying is fun and awesome, and you should do it all the time, but sometimes a lie gets so big that people don't even realize they're lying anymore. These instances where a good story is prioritized over accurate information are cases that I find fascinating, and have covered a few times in the past. We talked about how Chaotic never really had an explosive story worth covering up when the game was discontinued. We talked about the whole saga with Sega Technical Institute being put through hell to make Sonic Extreme. Or maybe they weren't, I don't know. Yujo Friendship's rulings, these were all treated as gospel for years. Today, I'm hoping to clear up a few more community-wide lies and let people in on ones that might have been known lies for years. Should you feel dumb for believing any of these? Of course not. In fact, I didn't even know one was a lie myself until I started researching it for a whole different discussion that now I feel silly for having believed for so long. See, there is no correlation between penis size and brain power. To start things off, let's clear up a rumor that I helped to perpetuate. Okay, so I might have lied to you guys once, but this pyramid scheme is really going places. Civilization, you already know where this is going, just let me have my fun. Civilization is the grandfather of strategy games. The sort of game you have to play to see just how much influence it really had. Other games existed before Civilization that had a similar style, but the level of detail and mechanics under the hood of Civilization made it stand out among all of its competition. The phrase, "just one more game," is usually attributed to games of Civilization, and it's because even a short game of Civ would take hours to get through because of just how much there is to manage. In all of those mechanics, there were bound to be interactions that weren't accounted for by the developers. And unfortunately for them, one of them happened to be really funny too. Nuclear Gandhi. Selecting the roster of world leaders to represent the entire history of human civilization was no easy task, as you had to get historical figures who varied not just geographically, but also philosophically. You needed people who represented economic growth, military growth, industrial growth, as well as passive styles, aggressive styles, and who were iconic enough to be recognizable for those traits at a glance. So to represent an aggressive, expansionist empire, pick Genghis Khan. For a perfectionist, civilized empire, pick Frederick the Great. And for a friendly and passive empire, you picked Gandhi. Okay, you don't pick Gandhi because why would you choose to play as a nation who doesn't get to blow stuff up, but you're still likely to run into him when playing your own campaign. If you run into Gandhi at the wrong time, though, you might just end up making an enemy of him. And instead of wiping him out with ease due to his lack of a standing army, you instead get bathed in nuclear hellfire as Gandhi drops hidden missiles like Marvel vs. Capcom Doctor Doom. Why did this happen? Well, according to legend, it's because of a programming bug with how Civilization was put together. Civilization works on a 10-point scale for how aggression works, with the AI acting more aggressive the higher their level gets. Gandhi, naturally, starts out with an aggression level of 1. He'll never engage in war unless it's defensive, and will prioritize all other fields over military. However, if Gandhi were to shift his political system to democracy during the course of a game, something strange happens. See, in Civilization, democracy, as a political system, has the attribute to drop any civilization's aggression by 2 when shifted to. But since Gandhi's already at a 1, subtracting 2 from that leaves him at -1 aggression, which is a negative integer. which the game can't read. Due to integer overflow, the game would boot him to the highest aggression level of 255. Because of that, Gandhi would immediately lose all reason and funnel his whole civilization into the production and use of nuclear warheads, as they're the most destructive weapon in the game. The nuclear Gandhi bug became so popular that Firaxis, the company making the Civilization games, decided to include it as an intentional feature going forward, making Gandhi still the peaceful figure we know him as, but giving him the chance to completely snap at any given time and turn this into a game of Fallout. As funny as this story is, and how ubiquitous it's become, to the point it's actually impacted the franchise, it's all wrong. Like, not only is the story itself completely fake, the rationale for why it works this way is also incorrect. See, the idea of the game working on a 10-point scale to determine aggression is giving it a little bit too much credit. In reality, it was a 3-point scale. Nations were either friendly, neutral, or aggressive. It's much more simple than the made-up version makes it seem. As well, because of this, Gandhi is not exceptionally more peaceful than Hammurabi or Abraham Lincoln, who also have the friendly tag. They're all the exact same. What's more is that the aggression level of the AI isn't some infinite exponent. It has a cap, and that's 3. Remember, friendly, neutral, and aggressive. Every integer past 3 would simply be treated as 3, since the game is only coded with these 3 static levels. A value of 4 would be treated as aggressive, 10 would be treated as aggressive, 225 would be treated as aggressive. I know, the bigger the number, the madder the Gandhi, but that's just not how programming works. We can actually further debunk the nuclear Gandhi meme by looking at the programming language of Civilization itself. That's right, fellas! Lock your lady friends up, Jack's talking programming. Civilization was programmed using the C and C++ coding languages, which, alongside a whole bunch of other stuff we're going to assume I can explain too, is a signed coding language. That means it's able to represent both positive and negative integers, meaning that integer overflow from the game being unable to recognize a negative value wouldn't have happened. If you want to know where that information comes from, Daddy's home! This explanation comes from Sid Meier's own 2020 memoir, where he explains why the Gandhi glitch would have been impossible. But this idea has to come from somewhere, right? Well, that's because the joke is based in reality, just not what many people have accepted. See, since he's a passive, friendly civilization, Gandhi is likely to go for a science victory. And at the end of the science development branch is nukes. Even if Gandhi won't use them, he's still going to construct nukes because they're a high-level science item. Then if you aggro Gandhi and start a war with him, he's going to go all out because that's just how the AI in the first game works. There is no fighting to surrender, there's just victory and defeat. On top of that, Gandhi would likely not have a standing military due to his aversion to violence, meaning his only combat option was the nuke. Gandhi, though, was no more or less likely to nuke you than any of the other friendly nations. He's not special in that regard. It's just more memorable that the guy who's known for peaceful protest was the one who nuked you, making his attacks way more notable. As for its inclusion in later games, this one's a bit more complicated. See, for the next 3 games, there would be no overt references to the nuclear Gandhi meme. People point to this screen from Civilization 2, where Gandhi is threatening nuclear war as an example, but this is just a generic screen that any world leader would get after accessing nuclear weaponry. It wouldn't be until Gandhi's inclusion in Civilization 5 that they would finally integrate this piece of fanon into the official games. On the table determining each character's AI traits, as in what they're likely to do during a game, Gandhis are all pretty standard. You have a high focus on things like hospitality and religion, a de-emphasis on things like hostility and deception, and in the category of nuke production and nuke usage, Gandhi scores a 12 out of 10! The highest rating of any character on any trait. Now, this does still come out to a 10, possibly as a reference to the original story's integer overflow theory, but a 10 is still exceedingly rare for any civilization in the game to have on any of their traits. The joke was further expanded in Civilization 6, as each civilization is assigned a hidden agenda for the game, and they pick from a table of available options when the game starts. Among Gandhi's agendas is Nuke Happy, which influences Gandhi to build nukes, commend nuke production, and scold those who won't build nukes.
There is no shame in deterrence. Having a weapon is very different from actually using it.
This agenda also has a 70% chance of being applied to Gandhi, another absurdly high variable based on the rumor. That's all it ever was, though. Just a rumor. A rumor that became widespread knowledge as far back as 6 years ago when Firaxis marketing manager Kevin Schultz proposed to everybody that they had gotten it wrong in a Twitter post. Well, it's a really good thing that none of us parroted the misinformation after 20, maybe 30 minutes of watching YouTube videos as research well after it was known to be false, and it's especially good that that discussion didn't randomly get wildly more popular than most of the other ones. Whoever did that would look like a real jackass. Now on to a series I've yet to be wrong about, Monster Hunter. I'm always willing to try though. Monster Hunter as a series has had an incredible trajectory. For a long time in America, it was niche. The sort of game you'd have one friend who was insanely into it, but you'd have never even heard of it. Now I say in America because in Japan, this is Capcom's answer to fucking Pokemon. We're talking so popular it has pop-up cafes, attractions at theme parks, it's big. I'm just talking about it how it was perceived from my perspective. Following the release of games like Tri, 3 Ultimate, and 4 Ultimate, it gained a little bit of momentum, and then World came out. World kinda fixed Crapcom. They've been doing great ever since. Now it's one of the most recognizable franchises they have, and has seen just as much popularity in the West as it has in Japan. Monster Hunter's beginnings, being in games that a lot of people haven't played though, has led to a lot of the series being shrouded in mystery. The first couple of games are not new player friendly. You get your mission, you get your Poogie, but from there you get a butter knife and are told to kill that thing. A lot of the English-speaking fanbase for Monster Hunter is only familiar with the series post-World, which means any information they come across, they have to take as gospel because they have no way to refute it. This resulted in one of the funniest fandom breakdowns I've ever gotten to see, when one guy asking one question broke a decades-long belief. Our story begins in Monster Hunter 3 Tri, and the introduction of one of the series' most iconic monsters, Devil Joe. Devil Joe is a brute wyvern, a terrifying mass of muscle covered in spikes and teeth with the attitude of an industrial shredder. Devil Joe has a lot of unique traits for a monster in Monster Hunter, the most infamous of which being its nature as an invader. Devil Joe doesn't have a set territory that it will hunt in. Whereas other monsters have only 1 or 2 biomes they'll appear in, like Diabolos only appearing in deserts, Devil Joe goes wherever it wants. This is because if something tries to stop it, he'll eat it. This manifests itself into gameplay by having certain high-ranking hunts be invaded by a wandering Devil Joe looking for food. No matter where you're hunting, you have to be wary that a Devil Joe might decide to make itself a problem, and it makes him one of the most dangerous monsters to encounter. He's not just seeing the sights, though. Devil Joes are one thing above all else: hungry. Devil Joes need an extremely high amount of food due to the stresses of moving a body that big and how high its body temperature gets. Devil Joes will eat literally anything they can fit in their mouths, like a pelican. Smaller, docile monsters, larger, dead monsters. Devil Joes will get so hungry they end up killing monsters you're currently hunting and dragging them away. Devil Joe will even take chunks out of monsters you've pinned down and trapped. And if the trapped monster is another Devil Joe, it won't hesitate to cannibalize one of its own. You're better off letting him feed too, because the two main variants for Devil Joe, Savage Devil Joe and Starving Devil Joe, are both triggered by it being unable to eat. Where we come in is in one of the most popular factoids about Devil Joe, where if you're hunting him and manage to cut off its tail, Devil Joe would actually eat its own tail to satisfy its hunger and keep fighting. This was a fact nobody ever questioned because it seemed like the sort of thing Devil Joe would do. It's a trash compactor, of course it would see its own severed limb as more food. There was ample evidence that this was the case, in the form of videos and photos that showed Devil Joe eating its own tail. There was even an official Capcom video released in 2013 where community member Deadeye Dave mentions Devil Joe eating his own tail. And for some reason, this interview was conducted with the in-game chat.
He will eat your poisonous meat. He will eat other monsters that are dead. He will eat captured monsters. He will eat his own tail.
Wow.
This became an accepted part of Devil Joe's mythos and a common joke in the Monster Hunter community. Memes and animations were made showing Devil Joe eating his own tail. Everybody knew that was something he did. Until one day in 2022, when a user named Band Lagaiacris spoke up. Now, Band Lagaiacris, now Band Gamoth, is nobody to f*** with when it comes to Monster Hunter. The man is one of the single biggest contributing factors to the preservation of Monster Hunter lore. He does extremely deep dives on the ecology and entomology of individual monsters, citing guidebooks that most English speakers have no access to. He's helped moderate the fandom wiki, he's been a source cited on all matters of the series, he's up there with somebody like Nomad Colossus when it comes to being as big of a fan as you can be of a game. So that made what he said in 2022 all the more worrying. On October 22nd, he put out a simple tweet asking, "So does anybody have any footage of Devil Joe eating his own tail?"
What?
This one question temporarily broke the Monster Hunter community. People brought forth the common examples of Devil Joe eating his own tail, only for them to fold under more intense scrutiny. A common way to fake a Devil Joe eating his own tail video was to take a piece of meat, which Devil Joe will eat, and then place it under his severed tail, then angle the camera in a way that obscures it and makes it look like Devil Joe is eating his own tail. Other examples include having a hunter pinned down by Devil Joe while near the tail, making it look not just like he was eating it, but there was an animation specific for it. It went so far as people editing the texture sheets of meat in emulated versions of Monster Hunter Portable 3rd to hide the meat and make it seem like Devil Joe was eating his own tail. This specific bit of sleuthing was done by Flyan2, whose video on the Devil Joe tail-eating mystery goes into even more detail than I do, and is well worth a watch even if you're not a fan of Monster Hunter. The community had been forced to face the fact that Devil Joe not only doesn't eat his own tail, he's never been able to. So then how did the fact get spread around like it was? Well, it's a combination of two things I mentioned earlier: the relative newness of a lot of the fan base, and the plausibility of the statement itself. A lot of fans have never played earlier games that Devil Joe appeared in, like the 3rd generation. And the same sources they'd go to find out about the games, like the wikis, would report the Devil Joe fact alongside other true information. The only reason it was accepted like that, though, was because it sounded so true. There's nothing Devil Joe won't eat. It'll eat living members of its own species. Why would it stop at its own tail? However, at the end of the day, all it was a 12-year-long case of the Mandela effect. Or more accurately, the very fabric of time and space bent in on itself to make Monster Hunter fans feel a little silly. Now the community is lying in wait for the day Capcom adds Devil Joe to Monster Hunter Wilds, gives him the ability to eat his own tail, and all hell breaks loose. Finally getting back into familiar territory for me, and unfortunately it's to find out that I've been wrong about something the entire time. Finally coming home, and someone shot my dog. There are individual fighting games that I'd rank among my favorites, but if I had to pick a single series as my favorite, it's King of Fighters. I'm a huge fan of KOF and SNK, so you can imagine it's been a rough couple of years. I don't want to talk about it. Even if I'm nowhere near good enough to play these games competitively, it has so much of what I love in a good fighting game. It's easy to pick up, has a roster of cool and recognizable characters. It has an extremely deep story, with individual character stories getting fleshed out in every new entry. I love it! Speaking of stories, one that's been getting a lot of play recently comes from KOF's home country, Mexico. Just like how all the best Tekken players are Korean and all the best Guilty Gear players are trans, Mexico has an enormous concentration of KOF players. From the local level all the way up to the main stage of EVO. Players like Violent Kain, Koopa, and Tamago have represented the region at the highest levels of KOF. The reason that Mexico is one of the largest KOF communities outside of Asia is because KOF and SNK as a whole are a massive part of Mexican pop culture. So massive, in fact, that when SNK needed them the most, Mexico saved the company. See, SNK goes bankrupt a lot. It's a party trick to them. And the one that nearly finished them off was at the very end of the 90s. SNK had been living in relative comfort and crippling fear for their entire existence. They were never the biggest dog in the fight of arcade fighters, but they were still able to hang in there. By the end of the 90s, going into the 2000s though, things were getting dire. The fighting game boom was coming to an end. Even Capcom would wind down their fighting game division after the tepid response to Street Fighter III and the rise in 3D fighters like Tekken. With at least 5 different fighting game franchises running at the same time, SNK had put all their eggs into one basket that just had the bottom fall out from under it. SNK was also primarily an arcade company, and with the industry winding down and home console industries booming, SNK had trouble adjusting. They were insistent on being the game and console manufacturers, which led to consoles like the Neo Geo CD and Hyper 64 making for extremely costly flops. This eventually led the company to be purchased by Aruze, a pachinko company that was only really interested in using SNK properties to slap on pachinko machines, killing the entire American branch of the company and the Neo Geo Pocket. In disgust, Takashi Nishiyama, the creator of KOF, and Aikichi Kawasaki, the founder of SNK, both left, leaving the future of the company in massive turmoil. October 22nd, 2000 Wait a minute. Why does everything happen on October 22nd? Anyway, October 22nd, 2001 comes around, and SNK is forced to file for bankruptcy. Or at least they would have, if not for the support of the Mexican player base. See, the high sales of KOF 2000 in Mexico were enough to supply a lifeline to SNK that kept them alive long enough to sell KOF to ELF, who would work alongside SNK to make future installments until SNK was able to ditch Aruze, get back to work on KOF, and continue supporting the company to this day. As a thank you for the critical help in a dire time, SNK would eventually add a new character to KOF meant to act as an act of goodwill to Mexico, Ramon. Ramon is a tricky character to use, but a really fun one to get good with. More importantly than that, though, was how much he bled Mexican culture, with his Roundwin quote even being, "Viva Mexico!" And it was this last-minute save that solidified Mexico as SNK's home away from home. It's a really sweet story that's even less coherent than it is true. This is probably my least favorite story to debunk out of them all, but there are so many holes in this thing you could play golf on it. So, the first thing is that, sadly, SNK's money troubles went much deeper than those that a single game could fix. I mentioned the slump in game sales and the failed consoles, but really, that doesn't scratch the surface of years of financial irresponsibility that SNK inflicted on itself. Wait, don't make a theme park? Where the hell was that in Economics 101? Even if KOF 2000 did sell unbelievably well in Mexico, It would have maybe kept the AC on while everybody moved out of the office. It wasn't enough. It could have never been enough. SNK also did have a huge foothold in Mexico, but it was a slippery one, since the lack of copyright protection on the Neo Geo arcade machines meant that bootlegs were extremely common, especially in Mexico. The Mexican KOF community was a huge part in increasing the game's popularity, just not its profits. At least not to the extent that it saved the company. Most of all, the story doesn't make sense from a time linearity perspective. How could Ramon be added as a thank you to Mexico if he was added in KOF 2000? The game that apparently saved the company. Not even the videos that parrot this opinion can keep straight if Ramon was what saved KOF 2000, or was made as a thank you for KOF 2000. Why does this rumor exist? And why is it so frequently reported in Mexican SNK circles? Well, to explain, we have to explain just why Mexico cares so much about KOF. SNK's method of manufacturing arcade machines was very different to how Capcom and other arcade companies did it. The Neo Geo Red arcade cabinets had the hardware inside of them to run games, but unlike other machines, didn't have dedicated arcade boards. Instead, SNK would release their games as cartridges that you would plug into the arcade machine itself. This made them a really appealing machine to have, since the price of a cartridge was going to be much, much lower than the price of a whole new machine. In a region like Mexico, this meant that the Neo Geo cabinets were the preferred option to arcades buying cabinets for games that might be outmoded way too soon. Instead of buying cabinets for KOF 94, 95, 96 and onwards, just buy the cartridges. The ease of access in the region meant that Neo Geo cabinets, and the SNK games that came with them, were everywhere. And SNK became a very popular developer in Mexico. Loads of Spanish-language videos talking about KOF or SNK all recount a similar story of going to the store to buy groceries and spending the leftover money to play KOF. SNK games, and KOF especially, became a huge part of Mexican culture. You know the breakdancing move, the flare? It's the one that makes you say, "Woof, let me try that," and then you dislocate your elbow? In Mexico, it's common to refer to that move as the Yashiro, because in KOF 97, the character Yashiro was introduced, and had the flare as his sweep attack, and it's how most people in the region recognize the move. A popular phrase in Mexico when it comes to fighting games is prohibido jugar con Rugal, translating to play of Rugal is prohibited. In KOF 98, the boss character Omega Rugal was made playable, and the term is telling people, don't play Rugal, you bitch, you fucking bitch, genocide cutter me again, see what happens! You know a fighting game character is overpowered when a sitting governor is asking people not to play him. Oh, somebody played Omega Rugal online. SNK has also returned the favor and put loads of shoutouts to Mexico in their game, like making that the Team Art of Fighting home country in KOF 94, or setting all of Art of Fighting 3 there. Games like Art of Fighting 3 and KOF 2002 have had world premiere events in Mexico. It's a huge region for SNK, and they haven't let that go unnoticed. I don't even doubt that Ramon was made as a thank you to the Mexican SNK fanbase. As far as a luchador character goes, he's way more than just the generic masked wrestler that most other games get, and it makes him feel way more interesting and way more personal as a result. Ramon, alongside some of the most fan-favorite characters in the franchise in Angel and Tizok, or King of Dinosaurs if we're keeping kayfabe, were made Team Mexico in KOF 14. It's clear to see that Mexico loves SNK, and SNK loves Mexico. But it's not because the country saved the company. Sadly, it's just not true. Hey, maybe next time SNK's up for sale, the Mexican government can buy them this time. I hear they're a little bit better. Our last story is one I'm familiar with, though it's not one that I fell for myself. But it is one that I try to avoid like the plague. I try not to think about Donkey Kong too much. Irreconcilable differences. We don't see eye to eye. It's never gonna work, and I moved on. Now with that said, there have been stories circulating for years about Donkey Kong and how much his dads hate each other. And spreading fake reasons to hate Donkey Kong is dangerous when there are so many good ones. After the arcade scene crashed in America in 1983, Donkey Kong was put on ice, as his games were more successful in America than Japan, and the American games market was doing awful right now. They instead focused on Mario to mixed success. When Nintendo needed a killer app for the SNES to counter, seriously, Aladdin on the Genesis, they contacted Rareware to develop something from one of the franchises they had in their backlog. For some reason, those British bastards thought themselves better than Monkey Magic and picked Donkey Kong. And from there, they developed Donkey Kong Country. DKC was a breakthrough in video game graphics for the time. By using 3D models as the basis for their sprites, the game was able to look better than anything else on the market. Made using the same computers that made movies like Toy Story and Jurassic Park. The marketing for the game understood that and focused heavily on the graphics. Every trailer or commercial for the game showing off the 3D models used to make the game's characters. Even an entire promotional mini-movie was made to showcase that this game was going to blow doors down. However, one person wasn't happy with how the game was developing, and it was Donkey Kong's creator, Shigeru Miyamoto. Miyamoto would harbor resentment against Donkey Kong Country, since his game, Super Mario World 2 Yoshi's Island, would be in development at the same time, and would have negative comparisons drawn between it and DKC. Donkey Kong's graphics were cutting edge. Meanwhile, Yoshi's graphics looked like something out of a children's book. That was intentional, but it wasn't going to be exactly popular compared to Donkey Kong. Even internally, Nintendo put more weight behind Donkey Kong and treated Miyamoto's project as a backburner piece. They were all in on DK. Tensions eventually flared in an interview conducted by Stephen Kent for Electronic Gaming Magazine in May of 1995, with Miyamoto and the co-founder of Rare, Tim Stamper. This interview gave us the now infamous Miyamoto quote, "Donkey Kong Country proves that players will put up with mediocre gameplay as long as the art is good." After Rare finished their work on the Donkey Kong franchise with Donkey Kong 64, Nintendo would work to undo the impact that Rare had on the franchise, keeping things that were too big to change, like DK's design, but immediately shifting course for the franchise's aesthetic. The very next game, Donkey Kong Jungle Beat, had no Rare-designed characters or locations, instead starting the series back from zero and taking their own stab at the ideas. In fact, the lead developer, Yoshiaki Koizuma, seemed to dismiss the entirety of Rare's contributions to the franchise, treating it as outdated and lame. All of the characters outside of Donkey Kong and the banana are completely original. We don't really feel the past look of Donkey Kong was fresh enough for today. We really gave our new development team the chance to really create something unique and stylish. After that, even more lengths would be taken to erase Rare, like when they returned to the series in Donkey Kong Country Returns, and the villains weren't the Rare-designed Kremlings, but Nintendo's own original Tiki monsters, or Tropical Freeze's Snow Mad Vikings. Even as recently as this year, with the unveiling of the new Donkey Kong design used in Bonanza, people were calling that Nintendo's way of erasing Rare's influence on the franchise, since the modern idea of what Donkey Kong looks like comes from the original Donkey Kong Country games. For Rare's part, we can even see how the feud influenced the Donkey Kong Country series. You ever wondered why Donkey Kong is only playable in one Donkey Kong Country game? That's because they wanted to put the focus on their own original characters. Now, is any of this true? No? Okay, so this is one of the longer held beliefs that we need to unpack, so let's start where it all started, with that EGM quote from Miyamoto. This has been a quote that's been thrown around as one of those "Miyamoto isn't as nice as you think he is" gotchas for years. But I have a real reason to doubt its validity. First off, the quote is cited as coming from that May 1995 interview with Stephen Kent between Miyamoto and Tim Stamper. But after reading through the article, the quote is nowhere to be found. The article does make a note of the two's fundamental game design differences, but it's more about the ideas of rules and expression, with Tim being in favor of setting boundaries and creating stuff within them, while Miyamoto found them frustrating and limiting. In fact, the interview has the two agreeing that advances in graphical fidelity do not make up for a game being fun. You still need to make a good game that looks good. Now, Stephen Kent did go on to publish The Ultimate History of Video Games, a 2001 book that cataloged video game history up to that point and recalls that May 1995 interview where he affirms the quote was said. Stephen Kent recalls the interview as being tense, with Miyamoto constantly talking down to Tim Stamper. But that's not really the tone of the interview. It was much different to how he describes it in The Ultimate History of Video Games. Whether that was out of Nintendo pressuring him to change it or not is unknown. But the amount of evidence suggesting a good relationship between Miyamoto and Rare outweighs this singular bad example. Miyamoto affirmed that he was a fan of Donkey Kong Country, and was in near daily contact with Rare to make sure the game was progressing well, contributing redesigned sketches that would be the basis for the 3D models used to make the sprites. When credit for the game was attributed to him in an interview done in Next Generation magazine, he focused instead on Rare's contribution and heaped loads of praise onto them for the quality of the graphics, while downplaying his own part. This interview also comes from February of 1995, 3 months before the interview in EGM. So either Rare started sending Miyamoto pictures of Donkey Kong naked, or the interview wasn't nearly as hostile as Steven made it out to be. Does Steven really have a reason to lie about any of this? Not really, but I just don't believe that the interview went down the way he described it. I even think there were times when Rare got especially comfortable with Miyamoto. Like during the development of Donkey Kong 64, when Rare presented a version of the game where the DK crew was packing heat. Miyamoto was horrified, and immediately drew up the coconut guns to replace it, which Rare creative director George Andreas said, "Oh, yeah, we can do that." That to me doesn't sound like a conversation going on between two people who hated each other's guts. People also say that Nintendo forced Rare to change Dinosaur Planet into the Miyamoto-designed Star Fox Adventures, which left Rare bitter and had them releasing the game in an unfinished state as an FU before selling to Microsoft. Actually, Dinosaur Planet was having a hellish development cycle that spanned 2 console generations, and when Nintendo asked them about trying to transfer the concept into Star Fox, Rare was extremely excited. Straight from the mouth of Kevin Bayliss and David Wise, 2 of the senior staff at Rare.
No,
not at all.
That was very encouraging, actually. I was quite excited because we worked on Dinosaur Planet for it had already evolved from one character into another character.
And from one games machine to the other.
That's right, it moved from one console to another. But when you looked at the 2 franchises, they were going to be so similar that we just decided, yes, we'll show it at the show. And Nintendo asked us if we could possibly do some kind of marriage with their characters, and it was just so exciting to get the opportunity to actually introduce some of these famous characters into our concepts.
As for the Koizumi quote, no surprises here, but it's not real either. The interview did happen, and there's a quote similar to it, but the original 2004 IGN article was mistranslated. Instead, Koizumi said, "We were actually very conflicted about which direction to go. But I'm the type of person who can't feel passionate about a project unless I'm doing something new, and Miyamoto gave us the freedom to pursue that." The quote wasn't dismissive of Rare's work. Instead, it was simply Koizumi expressing his desire to work on something extremely different to what had been done previously. And that's kind of a philosophy that Nintendo uses on a lot of stuff. Look at how different every Mario game is from the last one, or Zelda, or Metroid. Nintendo doesn't let any franchise stay the same for long. As for them erasing Rare's influence on the franchise, I mean, the Bonanza one is just really funny in retrospect, but as for Rare-designed characters like Diddy, Dixie, Cranky, and Funky, they were still in the franchise and wider Mario games for a long time. In sporting spin-offs, racing games, Mario parties, Diddy Kong was the very first non-Japanese designed character to make it into Smash Bros., followed by other Rare creations like K. Rool and Banjo. They never went away, they just weren't making Donkey Kong games to put them in. Ultimately, I think it's just not fair to say there was some grand conspiracy or backstage drama that happened with Rare and Nintendo when it came to the development of Donkey Kong Country. A lot of these rumors come from people who already have an axe to grind with Nintendo and Miyamoto specifically. And a lot of this sentiment comes from a real rough patch in Nintendo's history, the Wii U era where they bled goodwill. Finding stories to make Nintendo's Golden Boy look bad were really common back then, as the perception of Miyamoto shifted from the god of gaming to the more measured depiction we know today. If any of you want to be real super sleuths, you might try to find the quote that proves Miyamoto wiped his ass with Paper Mario and got rid of the partner characters in games post-Super. I hear about that one a lot, but I can't find the evidence. I know how exciting it can be to tell a cool story. Tell somebody something they don't already know, and show how much better you are than them. But when you do find a story that sounds too good to be true, do a little research to see if it really is. Maybe then we'll see people correctly cite that the names of the Colossi are all fan-made, or that Fake Crash was actually based on an officially made Crash plush instead of a Japanese bootleg.